is Devon Francke. I'm a Marine Turtle Research Associate with the Turtle Research Program, which is part of the Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center here with NOAA. And I want to thank Mahilani and the Education Program in Hanauma Bay for having me, as well as other members of the Turtle Program here this month. It's a lot of fun for us to come out and talk to you guys about turtles. So I'm glad to be here as one of the first speakers. I think Kyle Van Houten was here last week to talk to you guys, but I'm here to talk to you guys just a little bit about an overview of our program, just in general, what it is that we do as a Turtle Research Program. And then after that, talk a little bit about biology of sea turtles in Hawaii, which will then also focus a little bit on threats to Hawaiian sea turtles. And then lastly, I'll finish by talking specifically about what we know about sea turtles here at Hanauma Bay. So first we'll go through and talk about the different activities that we do as a program. So one of the things that we do is we study sea turtle biology, ecology, and life history through our ocean capture work that we do. So we have lots of field sites all around the main Hawaiian Islands that we go out again and again and again to study the health of turtles, their growth rates, to get biological samples, things like that, to study the turtles. And actually, Hanauma Bay is one of those sites that we come to on a fairly frequent basis to study the turtles. So we'll talk a little bit more about Hanauma Bay when we get to that point later in the lecture. Another thing that we do besides doing ocean capture field work, we also study the long-term trends of green turtles specifically at nesting beaches, as well as in foraging areas. But basically, green turtles here in Hawaii, for the most part, all migrate both from the main Hawaiian Islands and from the northwestern Hawaiian Islands to the French frigate shoals when they are sexually mature. About 90% of all green turtles nest in the French frigate shoals. And about 50% of those turtles all nest on one island, which is East Island. So one tiny little island within here is where a good majority of the number of green turtles nest. What we've done for the last 42 years is we have sent a researcher or two researchers up to East Island to study these turtles. So basically, they're up there for a month or two at a time. He does things like tagging these turtles. He'll modal tool them. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But it's a way for us to get an idea, a count of how many turtles there are year after year after year. By the way, anytime if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and ask. I'm happy to answer them at any point throughout the talk here. And so basically what we've learned from these 42 years of research is we can see here this graph shows the annual trend over 40 years with the estimated number of green turtles based on our work up in the French frigate shoals. What we can see is that the population generally rises about 3, 4, 5% per year. It does kind of do a little bit of a roller coaster up and down every year because they don't nest every single year. It's about every 2 to 3 years on average that green turtles go up to nest. But in 2011, we had a record year of 843, which was the most that we'd ever had. And I'll get to this year in just a second. But what you can see is that more towards the beginning, there isn't as much of an increase. But it was in 1976 that turtles were put on the Endangered Species Act. And at that point is when the population slowly started to climb up again and again and again. So 2013, actually, we didn't have a normal season. There was a microburst storm that happened a few months before we were going to go up that destroyed the facilities up there. So there was no way for us to do a normal season. So we did send someone up just to do a general account of what turtles were on the various islands. But this last year, we sent one of our workers up there again. And what we found here in 2014 is that it was even 189 this year. So that goes from 889 this year, all the way down from, 40, 50, 80 or so back in the 1970s. So the number of nesting females has definitely increased over the last 30, 40 years, which is a very good sign. Another thing that we do is we study the pelagic ecology of North Pacific loggerheads and leatherbacks to try to reduce the amount of bycatch. So basically what bycatch is when the long line fishery boats go out and they catch species that they're not the intended catch to catch, basically. So for instance, sometimes they'll snag loggerhead turtles, leatherbacks, sometimes cetaceans, sometimes other types of fish they're not trying to catch. But as the Turtle Research Program, we're working to try to study these interactions to try to minimize the number of loggerheads or other species that interact with these fishing lines. So one of the things that the observers do on the boat is sometimes they will put satellite tags on these turtles. And from that, we can get a sense and track their movements across the ocean. So we can tell that these loggerheads are moving more in the northern Pacific, back and forth across, but spending a lot of time in the gyre here as well, where there are a lot of environmental factors that may affect how they live since they spend such a great amount of time. It was actually determined about 88% or so is what the climate is responsible for determining their survivability. So climate is a very important thing in determining the survival of different species of sea turtles. So that was loggerheads. This is now leatherbacks. So we've also put satellite tags on leatherbacks as well. We can see that these guys tend to swim more south of Hawaii, going back and forth. I'll get more into the biology of these turtles a little bit later on in the talk. But basically, satellite tagging is a great way for us to be able to understand where these turtles go, and then we can talk with the fishermen themselves and be able to figure out where are they fishing. Are there certain areas that they should avoid at certain times of the year because the turtles are there, things like that. But the downside to putting a satellite tag or any type of tag on a turtle is that it actually can affect their behavior as well, which is something that T. Todd Jones studied. I believe he's coming to talk here in a few weeks as well from our program. And what we do is we use that data that these collect, and we basically assume that what the data is showing us is what a true live sea turtle would actually be doing. But what these tags are showing us is that they actually create a little bit of drag. So the turtle is spending more energy to overcome that fluid drag that the tag creates. So therefore, the dive profiles, the amount of time they spend at the surface where they go might be slightly altered. It may not be truly what the turtle would be doing if it didn't have that tag. So what this graph here shows is that as the size of the turtle, the SCL, which is the straight carapace length, the length of the turtle's shell, gets smaller and smaller, the amount of drag with the size of the tag gets bigger and bigger. So a smaller turtle with a larger tag creates an immense amount of drag. So the idea is to try to minimize the size of the tag and also find the right position on the turtle's carapace that might minimize that drag as well, so we can get the most accurate results from what these turtles might actually be doing. All right, another thing that we study is we do assessment and analyses to understand population variability throughout Hawaii. So this is a map that was just created for a global green sea turtle review that was done within the last year. That just shows a general idea of the number of breeding females in different green sea turtle populations around the world. So we can focus here on Hawaii, and you can see that big circle in the middle. That's where the French frigate shoals are. So we know that the most number of turtles are there in the French frigate shoals, with maybe a little bit of green turtle nesting throughout the rest of the islands. But then the question becomes, with that variability, well, we know here, like this map is showing, the number of nesting females per year. We've been collecting databases on this since the 1970s. That's one of the great things about the Turtle Research Program, is we have some of the most extensive databases in the world as far as sea turtles go, going back to the 70s and 80s. So we have a lot of data we've collected, and it's great because it's a lot easier to analyze the data when you have that much. But so from what we know, what the data we've collected is that there's a lot of nesting in the French frigate shoals. But that doesn't help us with the question of what did it used to be? Where did the turtles used to nest prior to 1973? So what one of my coworkers did, Kyle Van Houten, with a few other of his colleagues, is they went to unconventional sources to try to figure out what is the baseline, how many turtles used to be nesting and where in the Hawaiian Islands. So they looked at things like old newspapers, shipping records, things like that to try to get a sense of how many turtles were nesting in different areas. And what they found was that dating back a little bit further, so back to about the 1700s up to about 1950, there was a lot more nesting that was happening throughout the whole islands. So there's been quite a bit of a decrease from even the 1950s up until the time that we were collecting data as well. And even going back a little bit further, they found middens of turtle remains or shells along the coast, along some of the main Hawaiian islands too, even further back from records. So the question is, why was there such a huge decrease in the turtle population? Why were there so many fewer turtles now? And one of the reasons that people used to think that they blame it on is the rise in commercial fisheries. They would think that in this time period, like in the 1900s when commercial fisheries became big, that was the reason they just wiped out all the turtles doing that type of activity. So Kyle did a follow-up study just to get a sense and see what exactly were the commercial fisheries doing? What species were they affecting? So basically, these are graphs that show over time, 1900 to 1970, the amount of catch of different species. So small pelagics, large pelagics, jacks, bottom fish, and reef fish. But really what to take away from these graphs is there's a gap right in the beginning here, right in between the 1900 and 1950. And that's actually exactly when we want to know what happened to these turtles. Why is the population so much lower? So he went to another type of unconventional source. And what he did is he looked at menus throughout the time. So he looked at menus to see what were they serving, thinking that menus might correlate to what was being caught. And what he found is that basically, there were rises in certain numbers of species on these menus as commercial fisheries went up, which might correlate to the declines in those species. But if we look here down the very bottom, sea turtles, is this light coloration along the bottom. So what we see is that throughout this whole time of this rise in commercial fishing, the number of sea turtles on menus remained very small and very constant. So it seems as though the sea turtle population had already been decimated prior to the time of commercial fishing. And it's unlikely that commercial fishing was the reason that the turtle population became so small. So it's likely it's from some other source, maybe just recreational fishing, but not the big commercial industry that may have caused it. All right, going on. Another thing that we do is we study health. We do health assessments, including the fibropapilloma or FP disease complex. FP is much easier to say. This is a picture of Dr. Terry Work. He is the USGS state pathologist, wildlife pathologist, and he assists us on a good number of the necropsies that we do to help us determine cause of stranding, cause of death, those types of things, so we get an understanding of the fluctuation and what may be happening in the turtle population at any given time. So how do we collect those turtles, though, to do necropsies on? Well, we do that through our stranding, salvage, and necropsy program, basically, where we respond to injured, sick, dead turtles that are along the shoreline that we go to try to help if we can, but a lot of times they do end up passing away. But we have been responding to stranded turtles since 1982. So this is another very long database that we have for getting a sense of where turtles strand, why they strand, collecting biological samples, getting a good sense of where turtles are in the Hawaiian Islands. What we found is throughout that time, 90% of the turtles that have stranded have been green, which seems to be a good representation of the ratio of the population of turtles here in Hawaii as well. The majority of turtles we see up there are going to be green. It's fairly rare to see a hawksbill or another type of species here in Hawaiian waters. So there's about 200 to 300 turtles that strand each year. We actually had a slight decrease this last year. 2014 was about 197. So still, it's about 200. But it's been about that for the last decade or so. It's kind of leveled off, which is kind of a good thing to see as well, because the number of strandings aren't increasing. 27% of the turtles that strand are alive at the time. And since 1990, we've been able to rescue, rehabilitate, and release 888 turtles. So there's a lot of turtles that we've been able to save and put back into the ocean to go out and swim and continue being a turtle. And here's an important phone number for you guys too. If you guys do ever see a turtle along the shoreline that is injured or dead or sick or something doesn't look quite right with it, even if it's just basking and something doesn't seem right, there's a phone number for you to call, and either be me or my coworker Sarah. One of the two of us will likely answer the phone and talk to you guys and see if we can't get more info about what's going on with this turtle, to see what we can do to help it or come out and collect some biological samples. So, but we can't do this by ourselves. There are a lot of people that need to help us with these turtle stranding responses. From all over Oahu, we work with different community colleges and with the UH, with students. Natalie's actually one of them who helps us out as well, sitting in the back of the room there. Then we work with other partner islands, with NOAA sanctuaries on other islands and other places like that help us respond, because we can't be flying over to the other islands to collect turtles. But most important of all is the concerned public. Without you guys, we wouldn't be able to respond to any turtles. You guys are the ones who are out. You're our eyes that go out to the water to see these turtles. We don't have the time to be able to be just scanning all the shorelines that we go to, to see if there's a turtle, because there's just too many shorelines here in Hawaii for us to be everywhere at once. So, but people are everywhere at once. So that's why we're so grateful to have people that are concerned about turtles in Hawaii and will give us a call when they find a turtle that doesn't seem quite healthy. So the data that we've collected from these turtles that have stranded, this is showing green turtles that have stranded since 1982, break one up into the cause of stranding. So we've had 6,724 green turtles that have stranded since 1982. So we have a lot of data that we've collected. The first thing that jumps out might be this blue line here, which looks like it increases and decreases here. That is unknown cause of stranding. So just like human autopsies, a lot of the time, we can't figure out what causes a turtle to strand. We'll do a necropsy, we'll take histological samples, and we just can't quite figure it out. But we've been getting better at it, which is great. We've had less and less unknown cases. The other one that might jump out right away is this black line, which is the FP, or the fibropapillomatosis, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It's a tumor disease, basically, that's caused by a herpes-type virus. But for a while, this was increasing, and then it finally started to decrease a little bit, which is great. Other cases you'll see are just very minimal every single year, just stay along the bottom, like shark attacks, netting, gill line, fishing gear induced trauma, and miscellaneous. Miscellaneous can be anything from that turtle you saw on the first slide stuck in a crevice, to getting entangled in kite string, to just general trauma, things that just are so rare that we don't have individual categories for all those. But the other one that I want to point out here is this red line that has been increasing since about 2000 or so. What you notice here is that for the first time, about 2011, that red line surpasses FP, and that red line is hook and fishing line gear-induced trauma. So for the last 4 or 5 years or so, hook and fishing line has become a major cause of concern for sea turtles here in Hawaii. And actually, next week's talk, Sarah Leslie will be here talking specifically about these types of interactions, as it's become more of a concern. This last year, it looks like there are slightly fewer, which is good to see. But who knows what it'll do in the next few years? It might fluctuate more. Does anybody have a guess as to why there might be more and more fishing line interactions in the last decade or so? What's that?
More people fishing?
It might be more people fishing, but there might be something else going on too.
Is it because it's not a filament line, so it's not degrading what's in the environment, so it's continuing to build up how much is floating around?
That might be part of it too. There's just been with the history of more and more fishing, there is more fishing line out there, and it doesn't degrade, so they might just be getting more and more entangled in it. That's true. That's another possibility. Another one that I'm thinking of too is that the population of green turtles is going up. So with more and more turtles out there, there's just going to be more and more of a likely interaction of turtles with the fishing line, even if the number of fishers isn't increasing. So it's just more of something we need to be aware of as we're out there fishing, and make sure that we're responsible to clean up after ourselves. All right, but we can also collect lots of cool samples and learn lots of cool things from these turtles that strand. So even though it's sad when the turtle dies, there is a lot of good information. So this is a picture of Kyle Van Houten studying a Hawksbill turtle, and he can actually use the turtle's carapace, or its shell, in a specific way to try to learn how old the turtle might be. Does anybody have any guesses as to how he might do that? This is kind of a tricky question. I can give you a clue. He uses that post-marginal scute to do it. This is a really tricky question. So he removes the scute, and when he polishes it and does a lengthwise cut, this is what it looks like on the inside. Does anybody have any guesses now as to how he might use it to guess or try to figure out a turtle's age? But, right, exactly. It's very much like a tree trunk. They're able to count the lines to get a sense of how old the turtle might be. So this is a newer, more novel method that he's testing out to see if it's possible to figure out how old the turtle might be, which is pretty cool. There are other methods that have been used in the past. One is called skeletochronology, which is where we look at a turtle's humerus bone and do a lengthwise cut. You can count the rings on that as well. But there are some not side effects, but there are some downsides to it, that the marrow in the bone can actually reabsorb those rings, which can make it difficult to count and actually tell how old a turtle might be. Another thing that we do is we help to train fishery observers to go out on those longline ships. They're the ones who put those satellite tags on the loggerheads, on the leatherbacks, to help us learn where they're going. They record all the data, and they collect sea turtles for us to bring back for us to study, so that we get a sense of what's going on out there. We're actually doing a necropsy on 5 turtles this coming week that were caught out in the longline fishery. So that should be interesting for us to get a look and see what those turtles are eating, and figure out where it was they were caught, and all that type of interesting information we can get. We also help to train personnel that's on the outer islands. Like specifically, we work very closely with people out on Rose Atoll, out in American Samoa. We go out there and help them to learn the same techniques that we're using and share data. And it's a great cooperation that we have with different Pacific Island nations around Hawaii. Another thing we do is educational outreach using our research results, which is great. This is something we're doing right here today. And we'll be doing this whole month. We're very grateful again to be able to come here and tell you guys about the research that we are doing. And then lastly, it's important for us to publish our findings in peer-reviewed journals. This is one great way for us to give our information to the public, to share it with other scientists, and also for environmental managers to see what it is that we're learning so they can apply that towards hopefully being able to protect and conserve sea turtles here in Hawaii. All right, so we're going to change gears a little bit here and talk about the different species of sea turtles you guys might see here in Hawaii, focusing a little bit more on the biology of these turtles now. We'll go through them fairly quickly. So first we have green turtles. So these guys in the central North Pacific, they're either hatched from beaches in Hawaii or Mexico. Pretty much here in the nearshore water, all you're going to see are turtles from Hawaii. It's more when you're out in the pelagic deep water with the longline fisheries that you'll see the Mexican ones. So green turtles from Mexico are typically called black turtles because they have a gray plastron or a gray belly and a dark carapace, as opposed to Hawaiian green turtles that have more of a whitish or a yellowish plastron and more of a brown starburst type carapace. So these actually are the same species of turtle. They might be slightly different subspecies genetically, but they're close enough that they're all considered to be green turtles. But this will be pretty much the one that you see here in Hawaii. If you do see one with more of a blackish carapace and plastron, that's pretty cool. That'll be a pretty rare sight for you guys to see here in nearshore water. So green turtles here in Hawaii are considered threatened. They can get to be 300 to 350 pounds. They can get to be very big. They mature somewhere between 20 to 50 years old. The original thought used to be that turtles wouldn't mature until later on in that stage, that they would live for very, very, very long lives. New research, like with the method that Kyle's doing and with skeletal chronology, is showing us that these turtles might actually mature much, much younger. Might actually be closer to that 20-year range. So they may not be quite as old. They still get to be old, but not quite as old as we used to think that they are. We have been tracking at least a few turtles going up and forth between the French frigate shoals, and some of them have been nesting up there alone for 30 to 35 years, tracking the same turtle. So if they're up there for 30 to 35 years, they have to grow to maturity before that. So I mean, still, these turtles get to be quite old, which is really cool. These guys eat algae for the most part. I was talking about before, they nest in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands and the French frigate shoals. And again, just to pinpoint just how small that one island is, which is where the majority of turtles nest. Green turtles nest in Hawaii is really, really cool. So they nest about every 2 to 3 years. And every time they do go nest, they lay about 3 clutches or 3 nests per season. And every nest is about 100 to 130 eggs or so that these guys do. All right, next we go on to the hawksbill. Does anybody know the differences, at least characteristically, between a hawksbill and a green turtle? So if you were to see them in the water, would you know what you're looking for? That's one of them. Yep, you can look at their beak. That's how they get the name, the hawksbill. Does anybody have any other reasons that are different? Just in case you guys see one, because some are out here in Hanauma Bay.
The shell is different as well.
In a couple different ways, yep. Yeah. So one of them is that the scutes or the plates on their shell for hawksbills are imbricated, which means that they overlap. So if you see overlapping scutes, that's a good sign it's a hawksbill. Another thing is that their marginal scutes are pointed, they're serrated. So sometimes greens can have that too, so that's not the main thing to look for, but that can be one of a few different ways that you can tell it's a hawksbill that you're looking at. And actually, here's a good picture of it too. You can see the serrated edges there. It's kind of hard to tell that the scutes are overlapping each other here, but a few different ways that you can tell that it's a hawksbill out there. So these guys are considered critically endangered here in Hawaii. On average, there's about 20 that nest per year in the entire Hawaiian island chain. So it's one of the smallest known, if not the smallest known, subpopulation of hawksbill turtles in the entire world. So there's a lot of effort right now out there to study these guys and protect them as much as we can. They're a little bit smaller, get to be about 100 to 150 pounds or so. It's not known yet when these guys mature, but it's thought when they're about 70 to 80 centimeters in size. These guys eat sponges, other invertebrates, and algae, slightly different from what green turtles eat. And they nest in the main Hawaiian Islands, not the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, on Big Island in Maui for the most part. So these guys will nest every 2 to 3 years as well, laying about 3 to 5 nests per season. It's about 130 eggs per nest that these guys do. Then we have Loggerhead turtles. So greens and hawksbills will primarily be the only turtles you guys might see here in the nearshore water. Loggerheads and the other species we'll talk about are more pelagic. So they're going to be more further out where you guys likely wouldn't see them unless you're way out in the middle of the ocean. So loggerheads, they get their name. You can kind of see how they get their name with a very, very thick neck here. These guys are considered endangered in the North Pacific Ocean. They get to be fairly large too, about 250 pounds, maturing at about 35 years old. They eat whelks, conch, or basically whatever floats out in the ocean. They're not really garbage disposals, but they'll eat pretty much anything. So these guys, they hatch from beaches in Japan, and then they take up residency in the coast off of Baja California. So making that trek, like you can see, just north of Hawaii for the most part, moving back and forth. They're spending a good amount of their lives, though, out in the middle of the ocean. Olive ridleys are another species that we see interacted with in longline bycatch quite frequently. So these guys are considered endangered in Mexico and threatened in the Western Pacific. They're a little bit smaller sea turtle, about 100 pounds in size. They mature a little bit younger, about 15 years old, and they eat quite a bit of stuff too. Algae, lobster, crabs, tunicates, mollusks, shrimp, fish, again, pretty much anything that they can get their mouths on is what these guys will eat. We do every once in a while get stranded turtles that are olive ridleys or loggerheads, but those are turtles that are not supposed to be in the nearshore water. If they wash up on shore, something is very wrong with the turtle. Likely that they've interacted with fishing line, or they're just very sick and they couldn't stay out in the deep water. So olive ridleys, they hatch in the eastern Pacific, along the west coast of Mexico and Central America, as well as also the western Pacific and Indian Oceans, and then basically intermix out in the middle of the ocean. All right, leatherback turtles, the last turtle I'll talk about kind of in depth here, last Hawaiian turtle. These guys are the easiest to identify if you see them. They have 5 dorsal ridges, and they're black in coloration with white spots. And their carapace, or their shell actually, is very soft. They have a layer of skin that goes over their carapace. So it's not a hard shell like it is for the other species of turtles. These guys are considered endangered, and they get to be very, very big. They get to be about 2,000 pounds. So very large turtles. Yeah. So it's unknown when these guys mature. There are different estimations from very young, 9 to 15 years, all the way up to 26 to 32. So there's still a lot of studies going on with that as well. They eat soft-bodied animals such as jellyfish and salts for the most part. So with that large body size, they really need to be eating a lot in order to get that caloric intake that they need. And these turtles are pelagic, but they do some foraging along the coasts. So for instance here, they hatch in the Western Pacific, along Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And then they swim across the ocean, and they forage along the west coast of the US and Mexico. And there's actually another genetic stock as well that's in southern Mexico here as well that's known of. Another couple species of sea turtles that really are not in Hawaii. One is the flatback turtle. This is actually an Australian turtle. And the Kemp's ridley, which is the sister to the olive ridley, found in places like the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, is where you might find this turtle. So very, very briefly here to go over the basic life history of green turtles, since that's the primary species that we have here. Basically, these adult females will lay their nests, the hatchlings, hatch about 60 days later or so is when they come out, and then what they do is they swim out to the open ocean, to epipelagic habitat, where they spend a good number of years. It could be anywhere actually from 1 year up to about 10 or so. It's what's known as the lost years. There's still studies that are going on that we're trying to figure out how long these hatchlings actually spend out in the open ocean. But they'll hide under things like sargassum mats or whatever they can to try to stay hidden from larger predators, eating pretty much whatever they can while they're out there in the open water. When they get to be about 35 centimeters in size or so, is just about when we first start seeing them in nearshore habitat. So that's when they'll recruit, and you'll see them swimming in bays, along reefs, lagoons, estuaries, moving back and forth. But they can kind of be territorial as well. Some turtles do like one specific area, and they'll stay in that area for basically the rest of their lives, except for when they're doing their migration, which is great because it allows us to do our nearshore studies and be able to recapture the same turtles over and over again to study things about them, which is awesome. So they'll stay there for many, many years until they get to be much bigger, to about 80 centimeters or so, which is when they just about are ready to breed. And then they make their migration back up to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, to the French frigate shoals, where they lay their eggs, and the whole cycle starts over again. Yeah.
You said that they have 2 to 3 nests per season.
About that, yeah.
Is that all at one time or over a period of?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. They don't do it all in one night. What they do here is they have what's called internesting habitat. So when the adults swim up to the French frigate shoals, they'll spend a good couple weeks up to a month or so hanging out up in that area. And they may nest on consecutive nights or even like a week apart, but they don't nest the same night more than once. So they can carry multiple clutches within their oviducts, but they'll only lay one nest per night. They don't do multiple nests every night. Yeah. All right, so for nesting, step 1 is mating. So male sea turtles actually have slightly longer claws on their front flippers, which is what they use to help hold on to the back of the female in order to mate. And then the female emerges from the ocean and uses her front flippers to excavate a body pit for herself, and then uses her hind flippers to excavate an egg cavity, very, very gently, very delicate what she does with that. And it can actually be fairly deep, a couple feet deep, that she digs down with her hind flippers. She then deposits her eggs and covers it all up using all of her flippers to camouflage the nest. And I've never actually seen this myself, but from what I hear, the sand can just fly really far. So you don't want to be standing behind a turtle that's doing that unless you want to be totally buried in sand. And then she returns to the ocean. And about 60 days later or so, those hatchlings emerge from the nest and swim out to the open ocean to start their lives.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
If they lay about 130 eggs per nest, and then they go back to the ocean, do you have any statistics on how many per nest you actually get back or maintain their longevity?
Like how many survive to adulthood?
Yeah.
It's a rough estimate that it's anywhere from about 1 in 100 to 1 in 1,000 that survive. So there are very few, which is why they lay so many eggs. It's one of those survival strategies that they lay a lot of eggs and hope for the best, that at least 1 or 2 of them will survive to adulthood to be able to, yeah. But yeah, there are a lot of threats that these turtles face, which may prevent them from reaching adulthood. One of them is interacting with nets. Sometimes they'll swim into one that's along the surface, and the more they swim, the more the net just kind of cuts into their flippers and creates injuries, and they can't swim and will end up dying. Sometimes they get stuck underwater and they end up drowning. There are some graphic images here. I should probably told you that ahead of time. Sorry for not giving a heads up there. There are poachers as well, not really here in Hawaii, but other Pacific islands. It still is a prominent problem. Can anybody guess what happened to this turtle? Shark attack. But can anybody tell what's kind of odd and sad for this specific turtle? The difference between this side and that side. Can anybody tell?
I mean, it was attacked once.
Turtles.
You did
Yeah.
that the first time.
Right. So over here, this is a bite that's healed. So this turtle was attacked by a shark before, and it totally healed up. But this is the bite that killed the turtle. So he survived one shark attack, only to be attacked again quite some time later, because it does take a little bit of time for that to heal. So, poor turtle. But it is a natural part of the ecosystem out there.
Do the sharks get a lot of nutritional value out of that? It doesn't seem like, it looks like the shark took a bite. It doesn't look like he got a whole lot.
Yeah. There's a theory out there that the reason why a lot of these turtles will wash up with just a big shark bite in them, and that the shark didn't actually eat them, is because the shark is taking a test bite. It's taking a test bite to try to see what is the nutritional value of that turtle. And if they take a bite and it doesn't taste good, or something tells them that this turtle is not worth their effort, they may just spit it out and be like, I'm going to go find another turtle.
Don't the sharks do the same thing as humans, supposedly?
Possibly. I'm not an expert in that.
Yeah, I think the sharks just like the taste.
But yeah, there are a lot of theories as well as to why sharks may bite people and then leave them. It might be just to let them bleed out so that the shark doesn't have to worry about fighting, or it might be the same thing, they're taking a test bite, or they might take a bite thinking it's a seal and be like, oh, wait, whoops, I didn't mean to bite that and swim off. There's a lot of different theories out there as to why that may be happening. This turtle, another problem that these turtles face are boat impacts. So this is a turtle that was most likely hit straight on by the bow of a ship that hit it and basically broke into its shell, its carapace, into the body cavity and ended up killing it. Another more common thing for us to see when it comes to boat strikes are propeller marks on the turtle's shell. So you can see just basically it's parallel multiple wounds that, at least in the case of, this turtle, ended up penetrating the body cavity and killing the turtle. This is one I think we got a picture of that was basking, and these wounds were healing. So they don't always kill the turtle, but it's a harder wound for these turtles to survive than others. Another threat to them is being caught in bycatch out in the open water. And then another big one is fishing line entanglement, which Sarah will be talking more in depth about next week. But basically, this is a turtle that got mixed up in fishing line. It's wrapped multiple times around his flipper. It goes down into his mouth. And basically what happens is the more that turtle swims, you guys can kind of imagine pulling on fishing line. You can kind of feel it getting tighter and actually cutting into your hands. So that's actually what ends up happening to the turtle's flipper. This is an X-ray image of a turtle's flipper that shows that the more the turtle is swimming and swimming, the fishing line was actually cutting straight through the bone and would have eventually amputated its flipper. So that's actually a very common injury that we see when it comes to fishing line. But not only are external injuries bad, they can also get internal injuries, especially in their intestines when it comes to fishing line. They can bunch up their intestines, cause basically the turtle to float because nothing can pass through, and it can be very painful for the turtle. So just fishing line in general can be very bad for these guys. All right. The last threat to talk about here is the sea turtle biology disease of FP, or Papillomatosis, which basically is a herpes-like virus that expresses itself in the form of tumors on the fleshy parts of the turtle's body, like its flippers, the tail, the eyes, the mouth, internal organs. Some turtles have it much worse than others. This is one of the things we wait for calls on the stranding line, and we go to help and do what we can to help these turtles. But unfortunately, here in Hawaii, there isn't a lot that can be done. We've been trying to study this disease for over a decade, if not longer than that, but it's a very tricky virus. We have not been able to cultivate it in a lab. And so we can do that to get better studies of it and understand how it works. We don't have a cure, we don't have prevention, we don't even know entirely what it is that causes it. So there's still multiple theories out for what may cause this disease. It does not spread to people, which is good, but still, it's very, very sad for these turtles. But what this graph shows here too is the prevalence of the FP disease over time. So what we can see is that in the mid-90s, it was quite prevalent. And since the mid-90s, it has been decreasing a little bit. And we saw the same thing on that stranding graph too, that the number of FP cases has been going down. So they are still out there, but it is good to know that there are fewer turtles with, that type of severity of FP out there.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So is that Hawaii specific?
This, I think, actually specifically is Molokai.
Okay.
Yeah, at one of our study sets that we go to.
And do we know if one turtle can pass it to another? Like, do we know how they're passing it?
Not specifically.
Okay.
A study just came out that basically shows that there are some turtles that might be like patient zeros that are like super shredders of the virus that may be, spreading the disease more than other turtles might be. But there's still a lot that we're learning. There's still, don't know if it's, pollution that's causing this, if it's a disease that's spread by cleaning fish. They go from one turtle to another. They might be spreading it that way. There's so many theories that are still out there that it's difficult to know.
So they definitely think it's like a viral and not genetic.
It is there. There's a couple different takes on that too. We do think it is a viral, like a herpes-type viral disease.
Right.
But there is a take that it might be possibly more genetically inclined, that some turtles may be more inclined to get it than others, may be more susceptible to it. It's possible that all turtles may already have the virus in them, and that they just they just need to be in the right condition in order to actually have that disease expressed. So there are, again, still a lot of theories as to why this is going on. We're actually going to be having a mini conference here with a few FP researchers from around the world. They're going to be coming sometime this year to have a discussion and see what we've learned and share ideas and see where to go next with this.
Is it always fatal? Can turtles recover from it? Oh, hey.
They can, actually. They can. So, very good leading question. Thank you. Yeah, so this is a picture of a turtle, I believe was on Maui. that was taken over time. I don't know the amount of time in between, but this is the same turtle. This is before and after. So sometimes these turtles can actually have those tumors regress on their own. The turtles just basically get reabsorbed and disappear. It doesn't happen all the time, but it is possible that for a lot of these turtles, leaving them out in the wild is the best thing for them in order for them to get better. Sometimes, you know, when we get these phone calls, we assess the turtle's activity level. We look to see the amount of tumors that are on the turtle's eyes and mouth, because that helps us to determine, you know, if the turtle's able to see, if it's able to breathe, if it's able to eat. If the turtle's really suffering, then it might be a turtle that we bring in to euthanize to end its suffering, so that it doesn't starve to death, or so that it doesn't, you know, it's not blind out there in the water and get attacked by a shark. So, but it is possible that some of these turtles can get better on their own, which is good to know as well. And since 1990, as I said before, we've had 888 turtles that we have rescued, rehabbed, and released back into the water with the help of you guys, the public. So a lot of turtles that we've helped and are back in the water and doing their thing being a turtle. And one of those turtles, actually, this is one specific case back from 2005, a turtle that was seen swimming in Hanauma Bay that had fishing line and a couple hooks that was brought in by lifeguards and picked up by us, but brought to our veterinarian, who then removed the fishing line, removed the hooks. We observed him to make sure the turtle was okay, and he was released back into the water right here at Hanauma Bay. So that's just one example of an interaction that we have here with Hanauma Bay. It's actually a very good lead-in for learning about turtles right here where we are at Hanauma Bay. So this is one of our primary study sites that we like to come to study turtles again and again. So we have done quite a bit of research here. And what is the purpose of our visits? Like I said, it's one of our primary study sites. So we come here to do health assessments of the turtles, to study their growth rates. It's a way to study their population size and collect biological samples as well, like blood, LG, skin biopsy, things like that. So we do come here on a regular basis. I think we're coming back in March as well as our next planned trip to come back and catch those turtles. So the question is, how do we know if we're catching the same turtle again and again? And we do that by doing different types of tagging on the turtles. So one type of tagging that we do is called PIT tagging, or passive integrated transponder tags. And that's this right here. It's a little tiny microchip that we either inject into a turtle's flipper, or we inject it into its shoulder area. And basically, it's like a microchip you would put into your dog or cat. And then whenever we catch a turtle, whether it's here at Hanauma Bay or a stranded turtle, we always have our scanner, and we scan those flippers, and we scan its shoulders. And if we get the little beep beep telling us that there's a number, we know that this is a turtle that we have a history on. And then we can go to our database and look up the history of this turtle and get an idea of, it can sometimes help us to figure out why a turtle may have stranded, or it might help us to learn, you know, this turtle, we've got the same turtle over and over again for a decade in the same spot. So this is a resident turtle here at Hanauma Bay, or something like that. Other ways that we tag them as well, we do moto tooling, which is where we use a Dremel tool to basically scratch in a very light number onto the turtle side, and that helps visual aid. So a turtle's shell, its carapace, is like keratin. It's like the same type of material that's in your fingernail. So we just go very, very lightly, basically then use a white paint to paint in that number, and it lasts for anywhere from a month up to a year. Really depends how long it lasts. But it's a great way that if it's a turtle that we know, it's a stranded turtle, put it in the water, and then we'll get a phone call saying, oh, I saw turtle number 888 in the water. We'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's this turtle. We know that. Thank you for letting us know. The turtle's doing great, or whatever it's going to be. So that's a great way to help. Sometimes we also put little metal tags on their flippers as well, which has a little number on it. That's another way we can, you know, people will call and say, yeah, I saw this turtle with a metal tag. We'll be like, oh, which turtle is that? And then we can get a sense of where turtles are, what they're doing. We also use other types of tags like satellite tag, or this is a TDR, a time depth recorder that we put on turtles, and that helps us to study where turtles go, how deep they go, amount of time they spend in water on land. There's a lot of different parameters that these types of devices can study based on what type of device it is. So how do we use all the data we've collected in research? Why do we come to Hanauma Bay? Well, we've had many publications as well as internal reports based on data that was collected here in Hanauma Bay, as well as other parts of Hawaii as well. So for instance, it's helped us to study what turtles eat. This is a paper about diet. It's helped us to study the growth rates as well. I think this paper down here at the bottom is also about growth rates. This helped us to study about the cleaning symbioses between cleaning fish and turtles. It's also helped us to learn about temporal and spatial trends in population and stranding. So there's this is just a small sampling of the number of publications that we've been able to use Hanauma Bay data that we've collected to learn about turtles here in Hawaii. So, turtles in Hanauma Bay. It's like a tongue twister. So ocean capture, that's what we do when we come to study the turtles here. We've been coming here since 1992, so it's been quite a while that we've been here. And since that time, we've caught 173 total captures. So 173 capture events. All of them have been green turtles. So the SCL, or the straight carapace length range, is about 37 to 66 centimeters. So this is just a graph that shows the amount of turtles, the frequency of captures at each of these lengths. So that shows us that primarily the turtles that are here in Hanauma Bay are juveniles to very small subadults, is the size of turtles that seem to live here in Hanauma Bay. So of those 173 total captures, we have captured 76 individual turtles. 73 of those have been tagged. So 37 of the 73 turtles that have been tagged have been captured more than once. So we do have turtles that live here in Hanauma Bay that we do seem to capture again and again. So it's cool to know that there are some resident green turtles right here. So where do they live in the bay? What do they use Hanauma Bay for? So here's the bay. Here's one spot where you might see turtles. What do you guys think a turtle might be doing if you see it on the sand? Sunbathing or basking, exactly. So it's, that's what turtles do here, as well as you see that very prominently up along the north shore of Hawaii. They come out of the shore to bask, and studies have shown they can actually raise their internal body temperature by about 3 degrees Celsius, based on how hot it is and how long they're out. But that can help with energetics and metabolism, things like that. It's also very cool behavior that only happens here, as well as another couple spots in the world. So it's fairly rare to see green turtles coming out just to warm themselves up in the sun. All right, what if you saw a turtle along the ledge in one of these keyholes? What do you think a turtle might be doing if it's along the ledge like that? I hear some murmuring.
Eating.
Possibly eating, that might be one thing it's doing. Sleeping, that might be the other thing. Yeah, so here's a picture of a turtle that's using a ledge to help it stay neutrally or positively buoyant here, so it can rest underwater.
Is that how they usually sleep?
Sometimes it's called assisted resting, where they'll go under the water and basically use the ledge to keep themselves from coming back up. Because the larger the breath that they take, the more oxygen they can store, and the longer basically they can stay underwater. So it seems as though turtles may be planning their dives before they dive, based on how big of a breath they're taking. They may know exactly how deep they're going to be going and for how long. So it's just kind of cool. All right. So if a turtle's out on the fore reef, slightly deeper water, not as many ledges to hide in, turtle might be eating, possibly, or just swimming, transiting between different places. And lastly, for example, if we see a turtle out here in the deeper water, a few boulders and some cleaning fish, turtle might be getting clean. So there are a few cleaning stations out there that we know of. So turtles do use Hanauma Bay for basically everything that they need. So that's why there might be some resident turtles that stay right here because they don't need to go anywhere else. All right, but what about the health of these turtles right here in Hanauma? For the most part, they seem to be very healthy, which is a very good sign. So of those 173 total captures, only 23 have had FP. So that's a very small number. Bringing it down further, 73 of the individually tagged turtles, only 13 have had FP. So it's a very small number of turtles that have the virus here in Hanauma Bay, which is very good to see. So that's with ocean capture. But if we look at strandings between 1985 and now, there have been 60 that have occurred here in Hanauma. So of these, their straight carapace length ranges from about 38 up to 90 centimeters. And this one small turtle here, that was a hawksbill hatchling that likely just got washed in, was disoriented and ended up washing up on shore. But of those 60 total strandings, 53 were green turtles and 7 were hawksbill. So there are some hawksbills that are maybe not here in Hanauma Bay, although they might be, or possibly very close nearby and just got washed in with these sick and injured turtles, was what might have happened. So what was the cause of these 60 strandings? Primarily, look at the red color, 23 of these were fishing-induced trauma. Even though there's no fishing in Hanauma Bay, these turtles get injured elsewhere and end up swimming or floating into Hanauma Bay, washing up on shore. 19, unknown. We're always going to have a number of turtles that we can't figure out what causes to strand. 11 of these turtles stranded due to FP. And then just a small smattering of other causes too. The shark attack, miscellaneous, which is emaciation, sleeping bag entanglement, that was an interesting one, and trauma, and then one boat impact. So for the most part, fishing line is still one of the most primary causes of strandage right here in Hanauma Bay.
What's your human take one?
What's the human take one?
Yeah.
Oh, human take basically means a person intended to catch the turtle. Like there was the intent there to actually catch the turtle and cause it harm. But we have also had a few rescue, rehab, and release turtles here from Hanauma as well. 15 of those greens and 2 hawksbills have been rehabbed and released from being stranded here in Hanauma Bay. And that's it. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Yeah.
How many rescue turtles are there here?
That's a good question. My best answer at that is the number of turtles that we've captured over the years. I'm not sure what the actual resident population is, but we do know that there are some that live here from capturing them again and again and again. So basically, it's just the number of 173 captures or the 73 tag turtles that we know of throughout the years that have been here. But as far as total population, I'm not sure. Yeah.
The sleeping under the ledges, do you know how long they can sleep?
It totally depends on a lot of different factors.
Size.
Size, the depth of the water, the temperature of the water, like has the turtle eaten recently? All of these things play into its metabolism and its ability to take in lots of oxygen and how long they can stay under. Is the turtle stressed? All those types of things. So they can stay under the water, resting anywhere from 5 minutes up to about an hour.
So here they were fairly shallow. So they could just rest that 1 hour?
They could, if they wanted to, if the conditions were perfect and if they wanted to sleep, they can spend a little bit of time underwater. Yeah.
How deep have you seen them go when you measured in depth?
The deepest measurement that we have from satellite tag was a green turtle that was swimming up to the French frigate shoals, went down 130 meters. So that's for a green turtle. Different species go different depths. Like the leatherbacks can actually go 2,000 or 3,000 meters deep. So those guys can be very deep swimmers, and they have some cool biological adaptations to be able to do that. Like basically, they have like a trachea that can collapse, to help them hold in the oxygen, all these types of things. It's pretty cool what they're able to do. Yeah.
If I was listening correctly, you were saying the green turtles, their nesting beaches are only French frigate shoals.
Primarily.
Are there historical records, like was Hanauma Bay potentially ever nested on or anywhere around Oahu?
Possibly a long time ago. There were the like shipping records and historical records and newspapers and document historians showed that there was a lot more nesting that occurred along all the main Hawaiian Islands and Northwesterns prior to the 1970s when we started collecting data. The population was already really small. So it's possible that there was nesting that used to happen here. But specifically, I don't know. Yeah.
What do you consider very small? Like, do we have an estimate of how many green sea turtles are alive in Hawaii as of right now in my island change, or do we just have a number that are coming into nesting?
Like the total population? Not sure of the total population.
Okay.
The best estimate we have is looking at the number of nesters. So we can see that the number of nesters is going up though. So I mean it's a good proxy to know the population is recovering.
And hopefully we get one mature turtle out of each nesting. So
Hopefully. Sometimes more, sometimes less. It's all variable based on all those different factors. So yeah.
Do you know the female to male ratio? Is it pretty much 1-1?
It seems like it is pretty close to 1-1. But that's actually a very interesting question too. At least from the number of stranded turtles, we can determine gender, which actually isn't something you can see externally until the turtle is an adult in size. When it gets to be adult size, the males get a much longer tail. The females much shorter tail. But up until that point, externally, you can't tell if it's a boy or girl. During necropsy, we can open it up and see if it is boy or girl. But it does seem like it's a 1-to-1 ratio. But the interesting thing is that with climate change, it may actually start to affect that ratio. And it may have already done that for hawksbills. It's about 83% female hawksbills right now, as opposed to about 50-50 for males. So as the temperature gets warmer and warmer, it actually affects the sex of the hatchlings. So warmer beaches, warmer nests tend to create more females. So if it was going to skew one way, that's actually the better way for it to skew. But still, more, it is better for it to be more of a 50-50 ratio. So that's one of the things to think about for the future of the species is what's going to happen with the sex ratio. How is that going to affect the population? Good question.
We have a few business cards that have, with Natalie's actually business cards that have the stranding number on it. So if you're interested to see a turtle, if you want this information, it'll be up here. Okay. And we still have some time for questions. So if you have any questions.
Yeah, happy to answer any more questions you guys have.
With the Hawksbill, I think you were saying there's about 20 individuals that are coming to nest.
20 on a yearly basis. So they don't nest every single year. So every year there's about 20. So, you know, there might be more than 20, but only one specific year you'll see
So if they come every 2 to 3 years, maybe we're looking for like 60 years.
or so, yeah.
Are we worried about the genetics of that population since it is so small? Do we know, are they like interbreeding with other populations, like how far they're traveling, or?
They seem to be staying in the main Hawaiian Islands. It's still, there's so few of them, we know very little about them. When stock does get that small, genetics is always a concern. But I mean, it's why it's becoming more of an issue, you know, more important for us to do what we can since they are critically endangered to try to get the population bigger, basically, learn more about them.
And how many nesting breeds did you say there were? Green turtles?
This last year, there was estimated about 889. It was up from 50 or 60 per year, so down in back in the 1970s. So the population is kind of quite a bit for green turtles, which is good. Yeah.
At what point do you guys kind of consider endangerment?
What was the question?
Endangerment. At what point do you cross that line from being endangered and not?
It's there are actually specific guidelines according to the Endangered Species Act that it needs to meet specific criteria which are lined out. It's different for each species. But basically, it's like once the species reaches this type of population size, across this threshold, you know, like different types of criteria, we can take it from endangered down to threatened. It's different for every species. I don't know off the top of my head what the criteria were for green turtles.
Okay, so we don't know where that level is between.
Right, I don't know off the top of my head, but they used to green turtles used to be endangered here in Hawaii, but they were lowered to threatened with population rising. So
How long were they lowered?
you know, I'm not sure how long ago it was. It was fairly recently, I think. Yeah,
In the last 10 years.
yeah, fairly recently that it happened. Yeah. The goal of putting any animal on the Endangered Species Act is to take it off. So it's to eventually get it back to the point where it doesn't need to be protected anymore. So hopefully with the rising populations that will be able to happen. But then there's a whole other concern of climate change and how's that going to affect with sea level rise, you know, because they nest on, you know, French frigate shoals like this beach here, which is very low lying. And it's like, what's going to happen if, you know, the whole island gets flooded? Are they all just going to, you know, be like, all right, well, we don't have anywhere to nest, so that's it. And just, you know, turn belly up? Probably not. You know, turtles have been around for millions of years, and they're probably going to be resilient and figure out a way to survive. But until climate change happens, you know, it's going to be something that we need to keep studying them and keep trying to figure out what's going to happen in the population.
From my understanding, the same female almost always returns to the exact same nesting ground, though. Sometimes like within years of where they've nested before. Is that correct?
Yeah, or close nearby. Yeah.
So losing a whole island, a whole atoll that they're nesting at would potentially, they would be lost for a little while at least.
They might, or they might just be resilient and be like, oh, there's another island over there.
Yeah.
You know, but until that happens, you know, and they're forced to choose somewhere else to go nest. Yeah.
Did the hurricanes and how we had a lot of hurricanes coming last year, did that affect any of their nesting as far as? Because I know you said it damaged your guys'
Yeah.
facilities.
It damages the facilities. I mean, turtles are very resilient. They're very tough. If you see them along the shoreline, up along the North Shore, you know, they'll be like munching on the algae, and a big wave comes in and just like smashes them. And then the wave will go back, and you see them they're still there, you know, munching on the algae. It's like, all right, well, it takes a lot to do that. There's actually there was a spike in the stranding graph that we had in miscellaneous back in 2011, and that was from the Japanese tsunami that actually washed a lot of turtles ashore up in the French frigate shoals. That the staff up there actually had to pick up the turtles and bring them back to the water because a lot of them had been washed on shore. So that's what a little spike in miscellaneous was right there in 2011.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.